Hey everyone, welcome to a special conversation for Worlds Without End. It's a LegendHaven 2023. We are joined today by Thomas Salerno. Welcome, Thomas. Good to have you back.
Hey, Dominic. It's great to be back. Great to be speaking to you again about the awesome worlds of fantasy and science fiction.
Especially sci-fi, and that is our focus today. From idea to infinity, building epic sagas in sci-fi literature. I don't know if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see behind him, he's got Mandalorian, there's Batman, he's got a Middle-earth t-shirt. He geeks out with the best of us. We've been on each other's podcasts. I'm 99% sure I've got you on my channel somewhere else. So it's fun to have you back. Did you chat with us in 2022? Did we get a recording with you?
No, this is my first recording. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how I found you guys through last year's convention. I actually have to thank you, Dominic, and the convention as a whole, because I think that if it wasn't for the inspiration that I received there and the connections I made with people at Catholic Writers Guild, I wouldn't currently have a book that's accepted at a publishing house that is going to be published in the near future. I can't say more than that, but I want to thank you guys because my writing career, I can attest to this, has taken off since I've met you and the people at the Catholic Writers Guild, these two great communities. It's just been spectacular to be a part of this group of faith-filled writers. It's just been amazing.
That's awesome. Well, hey, we'll just wrap right there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. That was a great little trailer. So, okay, just kidding. Okay, so Thomas is a children's author, freelance writer, and a podcaster from Long Island, New York. His writing has been featured in 2 nonfiction anthologies, Tolkien and Faith, and The Christ Bearer. And you've actually got a copy of The Christ Bearer. You want to hold that up and wave that puppy around? Look at that thing, people. It looks incredible. Hold it close to the camera. It's got a riff on Saint Joseph. He looks like
Saint Christopher, rather.
Oh, I'm sorry, Saint Christopher. Yeah. So he had, and they're published by Voyage Comics. So he has a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology from Stony Brook University. Check him out on Substack, and you can subscribe to him. We'll put that link in the description. So for today, we're talking about building epic sagas in sci-fi literature. Where do you want to go with this, Thomas?
Well, specifically, I want to talk about the kind of science fiction literature that I enjoy both to read and to write. It's one of my favorite genres to read in, along with epic fantasy. And sci-fi is probably my favorite genre to write in, although I write both science fiction and fantasy stories, none of them published yet. But I really like to explore these different worlds. And of course, this year's con is all about Worlds Without End. And specifically, I want to focus on what's, I guess, commonly referred to as science fantasy. Because when most people, I guess in the general public, kind of make the distinction between science fiction and fantasy. But I think when they think of science fiction in that way, what they're really thinking of is what most of us sci-fi aficionados like to call hard sci-fi.
Right.
Science fiction that's really heavy on scientific accuracy and getting things right, doesn't include a lot of fantastical out there elements. And there's merit to that. I enjoy reading those kinds of sci-fi books sometimes, but I'm really a fan of sci-fi when it kind of bends genre expectations and incorporates more of those fantastical elements, and of course the best known example of that is Star Wars. And and I will, I have the Mandalorian, where is he? There he is. Picture, I will happily admit to being borderline obsessed with Star Wars, and we're living in a golden age of Star Wars. Star Wars is everywhere. We've got these great streaming shows like The Mandalorian and Ahsoka. We've got these, video games and novels and comic books. It's everywhere. But in a way, I feel that Star Wars has kind of crowded out the science fantasy space. And I want to use my platform here to encourage more writers to delve into science fantasy.
So first, what are a couple of other examples? Like you say, it's kind of crowded it out because it's just so popular.
It's just huge.
Yeah. What are a couple of examples? And then why is it, why do you think it's valuable and important, like as a genre?
Well, and I think for other examples, first you have to look to the past, because Star Wars itself was influenced by so many things like Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter of Mars books, the whole sword and planet, they call it subgenre, kind of like sword and sorcery, but it takes place on Mars or some other planet. You know, those books really influenced George Lucas, as did Dune. And some people may think Dune is hard sci-fi, but it has sort of mystical and quasi-magical elements that I think it definitely is in that borderland or even full in science fantasy. There's, of course, for many Christian readers will know C.S. Lewis's magnificent space trilogy, Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, That Hideous Strength, which are just tremendous books. And they are probably like the cornerstone Christian science fantasy story. But like, how many others can you name, really? And then there are other Christian science fiction, but I feel like the science fantasy space could use more contributors. Oh, before I forget, Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles. I mean, he was writing that when scientific studies of Mars were showing that it was a barren planet. There was no intelligent aliens there. He threw all the contemporary science out the window and just wrote a book about the human colonization of Mars, and really a book about the American experience, about American civilization. It's really, the Martian Chronicles is one of my favorites because it does what science fantasy can do so well, is an allegory. It's really an allegory of the United States and our experiences with manifest destiny and other philosophies like that, and the consequences of those philosophies. And that's what science fantasy does so well. Like the fantasy genre in general, it takes those philosophical ideas and is able to explore them through the trappings of spaceships and aliens and cyborgs and astronauts and stuff. And I just love those kind of stories because it just allows the imagination to run wild while also exploring some really cool worlds.
Yeah, fantastic. I grew up reading War of the Worlds. I mean, that was that. I can't remember how many times I reread that one, and The Time Machine. So H.G. Wells was one of my kind of influences, and Jules Verne. Love those two. I actually have not heard of Ray Bradbury's book, like you mentioned. I've read his Fahrenheit 451 and 1984, and I think that's something that I have. In just looking at the rise of science fiction, how it is such a reflection, an opportunity for us in the First World West to reflect on what we think about ourselves and our interaction with the universe. But but coming back more to like what your topic and your point is about, building this epic saga and so on. There's a reason. What would you say is the key reason why Star Wars is it's kind of crowding out all the others, but it's also popular for a reason, not just because it's got the best advertising. People are showing up and they're in love with it, and there's a reason for that. Why do you think we love, first of all, the saga, and second of all, this kind of sci-fi fantasy as opposed to just sci-fi?
I think that Star Wars is tapping into something very primal. Not only just we human beings are storytelling beings, on a way that even some of our closest relatives in the animal world are not. We tell stories. We've been telling them for as long as we've existed. And because I think we realize that in some sense, we are protagonists or perhaps even just side characters in a larger story. That the world itself is a story being told by the master storyteller. And I think that we perceive that we are in this story. Some of my colleagues in the anthropology community might differ with me on that, coming at it, as many of them do, from a more secular perspective. But I really believe that a full human anthropology is incomplete without exploring that idea of us being storytelling creatures in a story. And I just want one book that does this really well, explaining it about Star Wars. It's unfortunately out of print.
Oh, no.
But that is Star Wars, The Magic of Myth.
Ooh,
and you can actually, there are used copies. I got mine copy used, I think off of eBay or something like that. But it was a companion to an exhibit that was at the Smithsonian that I went to back in the day. And I think that's where I got my original copy that I then unfortunately lost. But this book first introduced me to the idea of Star Wars as this kind of primal mythology, this sort of melding together, a sort of 20th century expression of the monomyth made popular by, of course, the hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell and his studies of mythology, building off of Jungian archetypes and the philosophy of Jung. And I really think that Star Wars has that kind of primal, dreamlike quality to it, that it really, I think that's what people are responding to. They want to feel like they are these heroes like Luke Skywalker and Din Djarin and Rey. They feel like they are a part of something when they are experiencing Star Wars. Have you ever noticed that those trailers for the movies elicit almost religious responses out of people?
Just like, the awe and the wonder and the desire. Yeah, very liturgical.
Yeah. The music along with the visuals, it pulls people in, just like a beautiful liturgy pulls you into this experience. You're not just a spectator, you're part of the experience. And so many Star Wars fans do this by showing up at the screenings in cosplay or by going to Star Wars Celebration. You know, it's not just, Star Wars is not just watching a movie or a streaming series. It becomes a whole communal experience that I think it's unfortunate that so many people are missing that, or they're not seeing it in our churches, and they're getting it out of this sort of, I hesitate to call Star Wars a secular religion, but I think to some people it is. But I definitely think that there's a hunger there.
I think it's actually more profound and more primal than that, because I've been thinking about this actually the last couple of weeks, how when I rewatched the whole Star Wars series in the last couple of years, and because I realized I hadn't seen them in over a decade, and I was surprised at how well the original trilogy holds up, and how it kind of languishes and it's sort of floundering and finding itself today, and so on. But what really, really struck me was how profoundly religious the whole story is. In fact, the whole story is about an atheist, militarist, materialist culture re-engaging with a thoroughly enchanted and religious reality, and that the agents and the seers and the oracles and the prophets and the priests of that of reality itself have been hounded, almost to the sidelines, out of existence, are no longer present. And it really is a reflection of how we see ourselves today. We live in a similar kind of universe. The purpose in the story has been pulled away from us. We don't know why we're here. The state tells us we exist to serve the state in various benevolent or malevolent ways. And then
or exist to buy things.
Or just to buy things. Yeah. And then there are these very curious fringe people of various religions and sects and maybe Christianity, and coming up and sharing that they have a gospel that just runs completely counterintuitive to everything that we know. And modern, especially in the First World West, I think, doesn't know what to do with that. And Star Wars is that story of encounter. And then for those who are like, well, it's, it's got all kinds of, problematic issues in terms of religion in it and so on. Part of me actually thinks that no, it's one of the reasons why it's so valuable is that the story that it tells is a very, in the best possible sense, it's a dualist, Zoroastrian, ancient story about the eternal battle between evil and the eternal battle between evil and good. Right. Now, from a Christian standpoint, it's not a coherent concept, because evil and good can never be an actual conflict. There is always ever only good, and evil is ever only parasitic.
Yes,
and it can become overwhelming, as much as we give it that influence and that power and so on, but it never is in actual tension or conflict. It's only in tension and conflict within us. But I think the reason, I'll turn this back over to you in a second, I think the reason why this story is so powerful is because as a culture, we have backslid away from the contributions that Christianity has offered to our culture in terms of reorienting ourselves and understanding how creation works, where God sits in this whole thing, what our story is, what our responsibility is. We understood that a little bit for a little while, and then we've kind of backslid. And then I think after this past century, we've backslid a lot. So we like all the way back down the ladder through the different religions to where we're now sitting at the bottom of the barrel, no story, no gods, no evil, no purpose, no point. And we don't know what to do with that. So to start walking back up through the ladder of human spiritual development, and you start walking back up through Zoroastrianism, up through dualism, okay, these are stepping stones back towards, truth.
Yeah.
Because every single one of those were that wrestling, that trying to rediscover or to discover truth maybe for the first time, or bring it back, because people didn't know how to make sense of all these things. And God is never letting them alone. He's hounding them, he's pulling them, but it's like childhood. That's, in a way, you can almost track that same level of spiritual evolution among humanity to actually how a child develops. Children have to sort of learn and think that way until we get to the point where we're adults. So
we have to become
Star Wars,
spiritually mature. Yeah.
Right. So my point being, Star Wars actually is a fantastic metric of where the general culture is in recognizing, yes, lightsabers and spaceships, but on a more deeper level, we love and recognize there's something very deeply true in this. And this is something science fiction can only do. Maybe fantasy can. What do you think about that? Science fiction is uniquely able to step alongside us and help us see you're very far away from understanding an integrated, holistic, enchanted reality.
Yeah, well, I think Yoda says it best. We need to unlearn what we have learned.
Yeah.
And even a lot of people who write science fiction need to unlearn it, because I think science fiction is one of the best genres for exploring big questions of theological and philosophical import. But for a lot of the 20th century, a lot of science fiction writers just ignored it.
Yeah.
Or at even worse, they would try to pillory it in some way, or make, like, you just think of the worst Star Trek episodes where Gene Roddenberry is very obviously poking a stick at organized religion. But I just think that I couldn't agree more. I think that science fiction is almost prime, because especially space science fiction dealing with these kind of cosmic issues is uniquely primed to sort of help us to make these stepping stones, as you said, and sort of rediscovering it. I felt that The Mandalorian as a series is simply remarkable for how biblical that show is.
Unpack that.
Yeah, and how much that show embraces a Judeo-Christian, or even just really a Jewish outlook on things. And I have read things that hint that was intentional on the part of the showrunners. You have this people, the Mandalorians, who wish to return to their promised land, their planet Mandalore. They are exiled, and they live apart from other people. They have these rules, especially the Children of the Watch, the more ascetic Mandalorian groups. They wear their helmets. They don't show their face in front of everybody. They are leery of even other Mandalorians who don't adhere to this almost Pharisaical respect for the rules. And they have to come together as a community, and they're grappling with these issues of religious identity. And even Din Djarin himself, when he's essentially excommunicated from his community for doing the right thing. And in fact, in my essay in The Christ Bearer, I explore Din Djarin's similarities to the parable of the Good Samaritan, because he is doing something that is an act of love. He takes his helmet off in order to use that computer terminal to find the location of Grogu, his surrogate son. So it's to save an innocent life. Yet to the members of his community, you still did something that made you ritually impure, and you're excommunicated. And I was very surprised and edified that the third season then made it all about atonement. And the Mandalorian religion grappling with atonement, where you wash yourself in the sacred waters of Mandalore and have your sins forgiven. They never say it outright, but I'm convinced that the Mandalorian religion is a monotheistic religion. Like they never name a god that they worship, but I feel like there must be some sort of figure like that in their tradition, especially because they have this very Jewish idea of, and Judeo-Christian idea of, atonement being absolutely central to their faith. And the fact that science fantasy can grapple with these issues, where a science fiction that just focuses maybe on quasars and orbital mechanics isn't going, and I've read science fiction books like that, they aren't going to entirely get it from that perspective.
I think, you're right. I think the Mandalore is like an aspect of some hidden divinity. I was just listening actually today while I was making lunch. I think it's episode 2 or 3 of Jordan Peterson's Exodus series from Daily Wire is now being released for free on YouTube. And Dennis Prager made a fascinating point about, was it the Talmud or the Old Testament? Anyhow, the Torah. He was talking about the Torah. And he said, one of the things that's so intriguing about the Torah is that there are no abstract ideas in it. There's only habit-based living out concepts. There's nothing that is, again, nothing abstract. Everything is communicated in a way that you must live it out. Abstraction is something humans learned maybe much later. We went through habit stacking for a long time. So it's intriguing what you're saying here about this. They don't have a lot of theory, and there's not really a lot of theology among the Mandalorians, but there's a lot of liturgy, a lot of habit formation,
liturgy, practice, and that communal life being so important.
I remember watching that last season and thinking, finally, this feels like the Star Wars I wanted to show up and see, especially that last moment where they're like flying through the sky like a legion of Iron Man suits and stuff. And it's like, this is what I always wanted to see. But what was also so cool, it felt the most like Star Wars out of all the new shows that I've seen, at least for me, because it harkened back to that original idea of a humanity as a religious being sort of stripped and denuded of that holy cloak and that holy identity, and then coming back to rediscover it. But now what's so difficult about it is that you have now left your home world and interacted with all the rest of the universe and creation, and everything is machines and empires and militarism, and the gods do not seem to be what we thought they were. But at some point we still need to come back and rediscover them. And then it comes the adult choice. Do you still choose the truth even in the dark when you can no longer see that light?
And I think that the next step for the Mandalorians is mission. They've recovered their home, that kind of Benedict option. They retreated from the rest of the galaxy, recovered their home, recovering their customs, their authentic identity as Mandalorians. And like us Christians, we are called to mission. We are called to transform the world by spreading the name and saving message of Jesus Christ. So I really think the next sort of step for them would to be go out and sort of not so much try to convert people to their way of living, but to live in the world as authentic Mandalorians in galactic society. I think would be an awesome next step for them to take. And it's just such a great show, and it's so well written, and it's to me it's like no other show out there, and it really, for me is the pinnacle of science fantasy. What this genre is capable of, the kind of topics that it's capable of addressing, that in some ways even fantasy these days sometimes struggles to.
Can you say more about that? Like why?
I feel like a lot of the wonder has been stripped out of contemporary fantasy. There's a lot of focus on realism and focus on the sort of... and it was an understandable response to Tolkien for people like George R.R. Martin and others to move away from the paragons of virtue to show their characters as more flawed and more human.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that, but I think that the pendulum has swung too much in that direction,
Mm-hmm.
where they have stripped a lot of the wonder and a lot of the supernatural
Mm-hmm.
elements, and also this movement to reduce magic to a system
Mm-hmm.
with rigid rules, I think strips a lot of the wonder out of it. Magic shouldn't be chemistry or quantum physics in a way. There should be some general ballparks. As Han Solo says, that's not how the Force works. So your magic obviously needs to make sense in universe, but there should still be that
Mm-hmm.
sense of wonder that it is a force that we can't entirely understand
Mm-hmm.
or control. Because once it becomes something that human beings just control, then it's just science. It's
Right.
engineering.
Right. And I think that's what's intriguing about, especially the original Star Wars. I've only seen the latest Dune movies. I'm not as familiar with the rest of them. What's another series? Not so much Star Trek, but again, I'm not as familiar with that. Anyhow, my point being, with a lot of these, what science fiction shows are doing is we're rediscovering contact with an enchanted universe, or what I love to use the word, the Numinous, which I think Lewis used, which is that contact with an awareness, an intelligent, angelic, spiritual, transpersonal, outside of the human, this re-engagement with reality. And you're right that a lot of wonder has been lost across science fiction and across a lot of movie making and fantasy, because we have made it as materialist as we are, that matter is all there is, and the best that we can do is just control and manipulate the matter, and then we just go here and we go there, and everything is merely a game of Thrones or a game of chess. And I remember once playing, it was Halo. I was once playing a game of Halo, and we were driving across this one particular planet. All of a sudden, it hit me, the sense of there is nothing else in this universe. Like, it feels like a lid on this universe of iron, and there's nothing outside of it. There's no angels, there's no God, there's nothing else afterwards. And so why are we doing all of this? Why all the pilgrimages and the trekking, and why does any of it matter? Mm-hmm. And within the Halo universe, I don't know that it does, or I can't. I need to be convinced of an argument that any of it actually matters, because you can argue things like, oh, well, it's a good thing to protect people. Like, well, and that starts the whole theological discussion. Like, well,
right?
Why? But whereas within Star Wars, we start to get that answer. And goodness all of a sudden has orientation. And I think that's why, coming back to your topic of writing and building epic sagas, maybe you can give some advice or ideas or your own thoughts on that. Why we need more than just one-off stories, perhaps, in this sort of thing. But a saga is like multiple iterations. It's got multiple people. We come back to re-examine something from multiple points of view. Why do you think that is an important thing? And we're loving that.
For me personally, it's because I like to see the characters grow and change over time, mm-hmm. and not stay the same. And it's funny, we've even seen some pushback, even in the Star Wars community, of seeing characters change as they grow older. And I'm like, but he shouldn't stay static. Mm-hmm. Like I'll just throw out one example, Boba Fett. Mm-hmm. With his new story arc of becoming this kind of, I mean, technically he's a crime lord, but still he's got this heart of gold. He doesn't oppress the people who are living under his jurisdiction. People say Boba Fett's gone soft, like the old Boba Fett would have just shot these people. I'm like, yeah, the old Boba Fett. Mm-hmm. But he's lived all these experiences, and especially his time among the Tusken Raiders, mm-hmm. which had so many primal mythic overtones to it, which they did on purpose, because they are a tribal primitive in the anthropological sense of that term. They're they don't have a lot of technological distractions. They're a hunter-gatherer society, and they're very in touch with both the physical world and the metaphysical world. You can see that when Boba Fett goes through his whole vesting, when they vest him as a Tusken Raider, you know, and the different liturgies and rituals that they have. I'm like, Boba Fett is now a changed man. And now to go back and see his whole, you know, through all the different Star Wars media, his story arc, or to see Luke Skywalker's story arc through the various movies, or Han Solo, a guy who essentially starts out as an atheist. He doesn't believe in the Force. He believes that matter and energy is all there is, you know, only he just needs a good blaster at his side, and that's it.
Yeah.
But to see these characters grow and change and start families and to become new, but to know that they have this past that has informed the way they act in the present. I just love that sort of drama.
Yeah.
And science fiction and fantasy, especially in their big doorstopper tome, you know, novel form, can really give you a lot of space in which to do that. And it's something I really enjoy in all my fiction, but in sci-fi and fantasy in particular.
Fantastic. Well, as we start to wrap, you've got a special announcement or something to offer people who head on over to your Substack and subscribe. And then if you follow the link in the comments and join Thomas's Substack, then around LegendHaven Day, he'll announce a winner, somebody who will win a special something. What have you got, Thomas?
So if you go and sign up at thomasjsalerno.substack.com, which is my author newsletter called Page Turning, and you can sign up for the free tier. It's completely free, and you get almost all of my monthly updates. I have a spare copy of Voyage Comics' The Christ Bearer anthology, which has an essay by me called The Good Samaritan, and also contributions from a ton of other great Catholic writers. And we explore the Mandalorian specifically through the lens of the Christian saints, including Saint Joseph and Saint Christopher. And it also includes some excerpts from books about Saint Joseph and Saint Christopher, so you can learn more about the legends surrounding their lives. And it's really a great book, as you mentioned. And the cover art is just incredible with Saint Christopher with
Voyage
the Christ
Comics
child.
is just, they nail everything.
They nail their covers. I've been working with Voyage Comics as a writer for their blog since like 2020. Now they actually gave me my first break as a writer. Nice. And I love working with them. Philip Kozlowski, who runs Voyage Comics, is a great guy. And yeah, so I will pick a winner randomly and from all the new people who sign up to my Substack, and you may have a chance to win a free copy of The Christ Bearer by Voyage Comics. This is my first ever giveaway, so I'm excited.
Fantastic. Folks, please hit that link, head on over, support Thomas, and puts you in the winning, or a chance to win a copy of the book. This is a conversation to promote the fact that Legend Fiction is hosting our second annual event, LegendHaven, which is a free online convention that runs in October. So check the link in the description to register completely free. Our theme this year is Worlds Without End. It's open to readers and writers anywhere. We hope that you come check us out. And well, I mean, we hope to see you there. It's going to be an exciting day. So register for LegendHaven, follow the link in the description, and follow Thomas. Thanks again, everybody. God bless you. Until next time, keep writing.